The millionaire despised the new coffee lady until he discovered she was the true owner of the building. Get ready to witness one of the most incredible stories of hidden identity, assumed superior appearances, and that the person you're treating poorly might actually be the one person who controls your entire future. If you're ready to be amazed by this incredible story of secret ownership, hidden authority, and how assumptions about people based on their appearance can lead to the most shocking revelations, make sure to hit that like button right now, subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories, and don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single moment of what's about to unfold. Now let's dive into this extraordinary story that will remind you why respect should never depend on someone's job title or appearance. Chapter 1. The New Employee. The gleaming glass tower of Hartford Financial Plaza stood 45 stories above downtown Chicago's financial district, its polished marble lobby reflecting the wealth and power of the investment firms, law offices, and corporate headquarters that occupied its premium office spaces. On the 38th floor, Blackstone Capital Management commanded a corner suite that offered panoramic views of Lake Michigan and housed one of the Midwest's most successful hedge funds. Richard Blackstone III, the firm's managing partner and heir to a family fortune worth over $800 million, arrived at his office that Monday morning with his usual sense of entitlement and barely concealed disdain for anyone he considered beneath his social and economic status. At 42 years old, Richard had inherited both his wealth and his position at Blackstone Capital, along with an arrogance that made him one of Chicago's most difficult and demanding business leaders. "Good morning, Mr. Blackstone," said Jennifer Walsh, his executive assistant, as Richard strode through the reception area without acknowledging the greeting. "I wanted to inform you that we have a new member of the coffee service staff starting today." Richard paused, long enough to give Jennifer an irritated look. "Why are you bothering me with information about coffee service personnel? That's a building management issue, not something that requires my attention. I thought you should know because she'll be working on our floor, and you've had concerns about service quality in the past," Jennifer replied carefully, having learned to navigate Richard's volatile moods and unreasonable demands during her 3 years of employment. Richard's concerns about service quality were legendary throughout Hartford Financial Plaza. He had gotten coffee service employees fired for minor infractions like bringing coffee that was slightly too hot or cold, using the wrong type of cream, or failing to maintain what he considered appropriate deference when serving his office. Building management had learned to warn new service employees about Richard's expectations and his tendency to complain aggressively about anyone who didn't meet his exacting standards. "Fine, whatever," Richard said dismissively as he entered his corner office. "Just make sure whoever it is understands that I expect perfect service and complete professionalism. I don't have time to deal with incompetent help." What Richard didn't know was that the new coffee service employee he was dismissing so casually was actually Elena Vasquez, the 67-year-old woman who owned Hartford Financial Plaza and the surrounding block of prime Chicago real estate worth over $400 million. Elena's ownership of the building was one of Chicago's best-kept secrets, hidden behind layers of corporate structures and trust arrangements that allowed her to maintain anonymity while managing a real estate empire that included some of the city's most valuable commercial properties. For the past 15 years, Elena had used various service positions, janitorial work, maintenance, food service, to observe her tenants and ensure that her buildings were operated according to her exacting standards for both business efficiency and human dignity. Elena's approach to property management was unconventional but extraordinarily effective. By working in service positions within her own buildings, she gained insights into tenant behavior, employee treatment, and operational efficiency that traditional property management companies could never provide. She knew which companies treated their employees well, which ones created hostile work environments, and which tenants were likely to cause problems that could affect her property's reputations and values. More importantly, Elena's service work allowed her to evaluate the character of her tenants in ways that background checks and financial references couldn't reveal. She had learned that someone's treatment of service workers was the most accurate indicator of their true character and likely behavior as a tenant. "Good morning, I'm Elena, the new coffee service employee for this floor," she said as she arrived at Blackstone. Capital Management's reception area, wearing a simple uniform and carrying the equipment she would need to maintain coffee stations and serve refreshments throughout the day. Elena had deliberately chosen to work on the 38th floor because she had been receiving complaints about Richard Blackstone's treatment of building staff and wanted to observe his behavior firsthand before making decisions about his firm's lease renewal, which was scheduled for renegotiation in 6 months. Jennifer. Walsh greeted Elena with obvious relief. "Elena, welcome. I'm Jennifer, Mr. Blackstone's assistant. I should probably warn you that Mr. Blackstone can be quite demanding about coffee service. He's very particular about temperature, timing, and, well, he expects things to be done exactly as he specifies." Elena smiled warmly while mentally noting Jennifer's diplomatic description of what were obviously problematic behavior patterns. "Thank you for the warning, Jennifer. I've been doing this work for a long time, so I'm accustomed to working with demanding clients." What Jennifer and the other Blackstone Capital employees didn't realize was that Elena's long experience included managing a real estate portfolio worth nearly $500 million while maintaining the operational standards that had made her properties among Chicago's most desirable business locations. Elena spent her first morning learning the coffee preferences and schedules of Blackstone Capital's 15 employees, noting the respectful professionalism that characterized most of their interactions while waiting to encounter the problematic behavior that had prompted her personal investigation. Her first direct interaction with Richard Blackstone came at 10:30 a.m. when she entered his office to refill his coffee and check whether he needed any refreshments for his upcoming client meeting. "You must be the new coffee person," Richard said without looking up from his computer, his tone carrying the dismissive authority of someone who considered service workers barely worthy of acknowledgement. "I drink Colombian dark roast, exactly 180 degrees, with 1 teaspoon of raw sugar and heavy cream. The coffee should be replaced every 90 minutes whether I've finished it or not, and I don't want to be interrupted during phone calls or client meetings." Elena listened to Richard's instructions with the same careful attention she gave to tenant concerns and operational requirements, understanding that his treatment of her would reveal important information about his character and suitability as a long-term tenant. "Of course, Mr. Blackstone. Is there anything else you need for your morning routine?" Elena asked politely, maintaining the professional demeanor she had perfected during years of service work. "Just make sure the coffee is consistently perfect and that you don't waste my time with unnecessary conversation," Richard replied, still not making eye contact. "I pay premium rent for this office space and I expect premium service that doesn't require my attention or management." Elena almost smiled at the irony of Richard's comment about paying premium rent to someone who was standing 3 feet away from him wearing a coffee service uniform. But she maintained her professional composure while mentally cataloging his behavior for the comprehensive tenant evaluation she was conducting. Over the following days, Elena observed Richard's interactions with building staff, his treatment of junior employees, and his general behavior toward anyone he perceived as being in a service role. What she discovered confirmed the complaints she had been receiving and revealed character patterns that made her question whether Blackstone Capital Management deserved to continue occupying premium space in her flagship property. Richard's treatment of Elena and other service workers was consistently condescending, demanding, and dismissive. He treated people like Elena as if they were invisible unless he needed something, and when he did interact with service staff, his tone and manner conveyed obvious contempt for anyone who worked in what he considered menial positions. But Elena was also observing something else. Richard's business practices, client relationships, and management style, all of which would factor into her decision about lease renewal and the long-term composition of tenants in Hartford Financial Plaza. The coffee lady, who Richard dismissed as irrelevant, was actually conducting the most comprehensive tenant evaluation in the building's history, and the results would soon determine whether his firm would be allowed to continue operating from one of Chicago's most prestigious business addresses. Elena Vasquez had built her real estate empire by understanding that true success required both business acumen and human decency, and she was about to discover whether Richard Blackstone possessed either quality that would justify his continued presence in her building. Chapter 2. The Pattern. Over the following 2 weeks, Elena Vasquez continued her covert evaluation of Richard Blackstone, while working as the coffee service employee for the 38th floor of Hartford Financial Plaza. Each day brought new examples of behavior that reinforced her growing concerns about having Blackstone Capital Management as a tenant in her flagship property. Eleanor's daily routine gave her unprecedented access to observe Richard's treatment of employees, his business practices, and his general character during unguarded moments when he assumed he was dealing with someone too unimportant to matter. What she discovered was worse than the complaints that had prompted her personal investigation. On Tuesday morning, Elena witnessed Richard berating Jennifer Walsh in front of clients because the coffee she had served was barely warm, despite being at the exact 180-degree temperature he had specified. The public humiliation of his assistant revealed a pattern of workplace abuse that Elena found both professionally unacceptable and personally offensive. "Jennifer, this is exactly the kind of incompetence that makes our firm look unprofessional," Richard had said in front of two potential investors, his voice carrying enough volume to ensure that everyone in the reception area could hear the criticism. "If you can't manage simple tasks like coffee service, how can our clients trust you with their financial information?" Elena watched. Jennifer's face flushed with embarrassment as she apologized for coffee that was actually prepared perfectly, according to Richard's specifications. The incident revealed Richard's willingness to scapegoat employees for his own unreasonable demands while using public humiliation as a management technique. But Richard's treatment of Elena herself was even more revealing. He had developed a habit of making demands that were designed to test how far he could push someone he perceived as powerless to resist or complain. "Coffee lady," Richard would call when he wanted Elena's attention, never using her name despite her repeated introductions. "This coffee tastes different from yesterday. I want you to make a fresh pot and bring it to me within 10 minutes. Elena would comply with these demands, while mentally documenting behavior that demonstrated Richard's need to exert authority over people he considered beneath his social status. She realized that his treatment of service workers was a form of psychological power play that revealed fundamental character flaws that made him unsuitable for continued tenancy in her property. Wednesday brought an incident that crystallized Elena's concerns about Richard's character and business ethics. While serving coffee during a client meeting, Eleanor overheard Richard making claims about investment returns that were clearly exaggerated and potentially misleading to the prospective investors he was trying to attract. "Our proprietary algorithms have consistently generated returns that exceed market benchmarks by 12 to 15% annually," Richard was telling two clients who were considering moving their portfolios to Blackstone Capital Management. Elena knew from her extensive business experience that such consistent returns were highly unlikely without excessive risk-taking or questionable practices. Her suspicions were confirmed when she later observed Richard instructing junior analysts to prepare reports that emphasized positive performance while minimizing or omitting information about losses and risk exposures. Thursday's revelation was even more concerning. Elena discovered that Richard was using his office for personal meetings that violated the commercial lease terms for Hartford Financial Plaza. She observed him conducting what appeared to be gambling transactions and possibly money laundering activities that could expose the building to legal complications and regulatory scrutiny. Elena realized that Richard's presence in her building created potential liability issues that extended beyond his treatment of employees to include business practices that could damage Hartford Financial Plaza's reputation and attract unwanted attention from financial regulators and law enforcement agencies. By Friday of her second week, Elena had compiled a comprehensive assessment of Richard Blackstone that included documented patterns of employee abuse, questionable business practices, potential lease violations, and character deficiencies that made him exactly the type of tenant she worked to exclude from her properties. But Elena's investigation had also revealed something else. Richard's firm was struggling financially despite his public displays of wealth and success. Through careful observation of documents left on his desk and overheard phone conversations, Elena had determined that Blackstone Capital Management was facing serious cash flow problems and might be unable to meet its lease obligations beyond the current term. "Elena, I wanted to thank you for your professionalism this week," Jennifer Walsh said Friday afternoon as Elena completed her daily service routine. "Mr. Blackstone can be very difficult. but you've handled his demands better than anyone we've had in coffee service. Thank you, Jennifer. I've noticed that Mr. Blackstone has high standards, Elena replied diplomatically while thinking about the comprehensive tenant evaluation she would be presenting to her property management team the following week. That's a polite way to describe it, Jennifer said with a rueful smile. Between you and me, working for him is becoming increasingly difficult. His demands are getting more unreasonable, and he's been taking out his stress on everyone in the office. Jennifer's comment confirmed Elena's observations about Richard's deteriorating behavior and raised additional concerns about workplace conditions in her building. Elena had always prided herself on creating work environments where employees were treated with dignity and respect, and Richard's behavior was fundamentally inconsistent with the values she expected from her tenants. As Elena prepared to leave for the weekend, she reflected on 2 weeks of observation that had provided definitive evidence about Richard Blackstone's character, business practices, and suitability as a tenant in Hartford Financial Plaza. The coffee service position had given her insights that traditional property management could never have obtained, allowing her to evaluate Richard's true behavior rather than the carefully crafted public persona he presented during formal business interactions. Eleanor's decision about lease renewal was already clear, but she wanted to complete 1 more week of observation to ensure that her assessment was comprehensive and that her conclusions about Richard's character were supported by sufficient evidence. What Elena didn't anticipate was that her 3rd week of VE evaluation would include a direct confrontation that would expose her true identity and transform Richard's understanding of power, authority, and the consequences of treating people with contempt based on assumptions about their importance. The woman Richard had been dismissing as irrelevant help was about to reveal herself as the person who controlled his business future, and the lessons about respect and human dignity were about to become very expensive for someone who had built his career on arrogance and entitlement. Chapter 3. The Confrontation. Monday morning of Elena's 3rd week brought the incident that would force her to abandon her covert evaluation and confront Richard Blackstone directly about behavior that had crossed from merely unpleasant to completely unacceptable. Elena arrived at Blackstone Capital Management to find Jennifer Walsh obviously distressed, with red-rimmed eyes that suggested she had been crying recently. The usually composed executive assistant was struggling to maintain her professional demeanor as she prepared for what was clearly going to be a difficult day. "Jennifer, is everything all right?" Elena asked with genuine concern, her protective instincts overriding her need to maintain the coffee service role that had allowed her to observe Richard's behavior without detection. "I'm sorry, Elena. It's just been a very difficult morning," Jennifer replied, her voice shaking slightly. "Mr. Blackstone is in an especially bad mood today, and he's been taking it out on everyone." Elena learned that Richard had arrived at the office in a rage after discovering that one of his major investment positions had lost substantial money over the weekend due to adverse market movements. Instead of accepting responsibility for the risky investment strategy that had led to the losses, Richard was blaming his staff for everything from poor research to inadequate support. He scheduled a staff meeting for 10 a.m., where he plans to restructure personnel responsibilities, Jennifer explained, using air quotes that suggested the meeting would actually involve scapegoating employees for Richard's own poor decisions. Elena realized that she was about to witness the kind of workplace abuse that violated not only her personal values, but also the professional standards she required from tenants in her buildings. She made a decision that would end her covert observation, but protect employees who deserved better treatment than Richard was providing. At 9:45 a.m., Elena entered Richard's office to deliver his morning coffee, knowing that she would likely encounter behavior that would force her to reveal her true identity and authority. "Coffee, lady, finally," Richard snapped, without looking up from the financial reports that documented his weekend losses. "I hope you're more competent than the rest of the incompetent people I'm forced to work with in this building. Mr. Blackstone, I understand you're facing some business challenges today," Elena said calmly, setting down his coffee while preparing for the confrontation that had become inevitable. "Business challenges," Richard exploded, standing up from his desk and directing his full anger toward Elena. "I'm facing business challenges because I'm surrounded by incompetent employees who can't follow simple instructions and building staff who can't provide basic services without constant supervision. Richard's voice was loud enough to be heard throughout the office, ensuring that his employees would witness his verbal assault on someone he perceived as powerless to defend herself. You people need to understand that this is a professional business environment, not some kind of charity operation where incompetence is tolerated, Richard continued, his face reddening as he vented frustrations about his financial losses on someone he assumed couldn't fight back. I pay premium rent for this office space, and I expect premium service from everyone who works in this building. If you can't meet professional standards, then you should find employment somewhere else that matches your limited capabilities. Eleanor listened to Richard's tirade with growing anger, not about the personal insults directed at her, but about the toxic work environment he was creating for employees who depended on their jobs and couldn't defend themselves against his verbal abuse. Mr. Blackstone, Eleanor said when Richard paused his verbal assault, I think we need to discuss your expectations about professional behavior and appropriate treatment of building staff. We don't need to discuss anything, Richard shot back, his anger escalating as he interpreted Elena's calm response as insubordination from someone who should be deferential and apologetic. You need to understand your place in this building and stick to serving coffee without offering opinions about matters that are way above your understanding, Richard continued, his voice carrying the condescending authority of someone who had never been challenged by people he considered inferior. I'm going to call building management and have you removed from this floor because I don't want coffee service from someone who doesn't understand appropriate boundaries between tenants and service staff. Elena realized that Richard's threat to have her removed from her own building had pushed the confrontation beyond the point where she could maintain her coffee service role without compromising her ability to address his unacceptable behavior. Mr. Blackstone, before you call building management, I think you should know exactly who you're threatening to have removed, Elena said, her voice shifting from service worker deference to the executive authority that had built and managed a real estate empire worth nearly $500 million. What are you talking about? Richard demanded, confused by the change in Elena's tone and demeanor. Elena reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out a business card that read, Elena Vasquez, Chief Executive Officer, Vasquez Property Management Group, along with her cell phone, which she used to call her property management office. This is Elena Vasquez, she said into the phone while maintaining direct eye contact with Richard, whose expression was shifting from anger to confusion. I'm in the Blackstone Capital Management Office on the 38th floor of Hartford Financial Plaza, and I need you to send me the lease agreement and tenant evaluation files for this company immediately. Richard stared at Elena in growing alarm as he began to understand that the woman he had been treating with contempt was not actually a coffee service employee, but someone with authority to make demands on building management. Who are you? Richard asked, his voice showing the first signs of uncertainty he had displayed during Elena's 3 weeks of observation. Mr. Blackstone, I'm Elena Vasquez, and I own Hartford Financial Plaza, Elena replied, watching Richard's face drain of color as the implications of his behavior toward the building's owner became clear. For the past 3 weeks, I've been working in coffee service to evaluate your treatment of building staff and your suitability as a tenant in my property, Eleanor continued, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who was completely in control of the situation. What I've observed during that time has raised serious concerns about your character, your business practices, and your ability to maintain the professional standards that I require from tenants in my buildings. The silence that followed Eleanor's revelation was profound as Richard processed the catastrophic realization that he had been abusing and insulting the person who controlled his office lease and could determine the future of his business location. Chapter 4. The Reckoning. The silence in Richard Blackstone's office stretched for nearly a minute as he processed the devastating realization that the woman he had been treating with contempt for 3 weeks was actually Elena Vasquez, the owner of Hartford Financial Plaza and one of Chicago's most successful real estate developers. Richard's face had gone completely pale, and his hands were visibly shaking as he understood that his verbal abuse of Elena could result in the immediate termination of his lease and the destruction of his business's most valuable asset, its prestigious downtown Chicago address. Ms. Vasquez, I had no idea. I didn't realize, Richard stammered, his usual arrogance replaced by panic as he struggled to find words that might salvage the situation. "Mr. Blackstone, you didn't realize that the coffee service employee you've been insulting and demeaning is actually the owner of this building," Eleanor said calmly, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who held complete power over Richard's professional future. "But more importantly, you didn't realize that your treatment of people you perceive as powerless reveals exactly the kind of character that makes you unsuitable as a tenant in my property." Elena gestured toward the chair across from Richard's desk, indicating that he should sit down for a conversation that would determine whether Blackstone Capital Management would be allowed to continue operating from Hartford Financial Plaza. "For 3 weeks, I've observed your treatment of building staff, your interactions with employees, and your general behavior toward anyone you consider beneath your social status," Elena continued, as Richard reluctantly took a seat, clearly terrified about the direction of the conversation. "What I've witnessed has convinced me that you represent exactly the type of tenant that damages the reputation and work environment of my buildings." Eleanor outlined the specific incidents she had observed: Richard's public humiliation of Jennifer Walsh, his condescending treatment of service workers, his questionable business practices, and his creation of a hostile work environment that violated the professional standards she expected from tenants. "Ms. Vasquez, I can explain those incidents," Richard said desperately, his voice carrying none of the authority and confidence that usually characterized his interactions. "I've been under tremendous stress due to market conditions, and I may have been more demanding than usual. Mr. Blackstone, what I observed wasn't the result of temporary stress," Elena replied firmly. "What I observed was a consistent pattern of behavior that reveals your true character and your fundamental lack of respect for other human beings." Elena continued her assessment, explaining how Richard's treatment of service workers and junior employees demonstrated character flaws that made him unsuitable for continued tenancy in a building where she insisted on maintaining professional and respectful work environments. "But perhaps most concerning," Elena said, "were the business practices I observed that suggest Blackstone Capital Management may be engaging in activities that could expose my building to regulatory scrutiny and legal complications." Richard's expression shifted from panic to terror as he realized that Elena had observed his questionable investment practices and potentially illegal activities that he had assumed were hidden from building management. "Ms. Vasquez, I assure you that all of our business activities are completely legal and properly regulated," Richard said, though his voice lacked conviction and suggested that he knew his reassurances were inadequate. "Mr. Blackstone, I've been in real estate development for over 30 years, and I've learned to recognize when tenants are engaged in activities that could damage my property's reputations," Elena replied. "What I observed during my 3 weeks of evaluation suggests that your continued presence in Hartford Financial Plaza represents an unacceptable risk to my business interests." Elena pulled out her phone and called her legal department, requesting that they prepare lease termination documents for Blackstone Capital Management based on violations of tenant conduct standards and business practice requirements. "Ms. Vasquez, please don't terminate our lease," Richard pleaded, his desperation obvious as he realized that losing his prestigious office address would likely destroy his ability to attract and retain wealthy clients. "We've invested heavily in our office setup, and we have contractual obligations to clients that require us to maintain our current location. Losing this lease would cause irreparable damage to our business reputation. Mr. Blackstone, you should have considered those consequences before choosing to treat building staff with contempt and abuse," Elena replied without sympathy. "Your behavior toward people you perceived as powerless demonstrates exactly the kind of character that I work to. Exclude from my properties." Elena's phone rang with a call from her property management team, who had located the Blackstone Capital Management lease files and were prepared to discuss termination procedures. "Ms. Vasquez, this is David Chen from your legal department," the voice said through the speakerphone. "We've reviewed the Blackstone Capital lease, and we have grounds for immediate termination based on the tenant conduct violations you've documented. However," David continued, "I should mention that Blackstone Capital is currently 3 months behind on their rent payments, which provides additional grounds for eviction beyond the conduct issues." Elena looked at Richard with raised eyebrows, realizing that his financial problems were even more serious than she had suspected during her covert evaluation. "Mr. Blackstone, is it accurate that you're 3 months behind on rent payments?" Elena asked directly. Richard's silence confirmed what the legal department had discovered. His firm was not only creating an unacceptable work environment, but was also failing to meet its basic financial obligations to Elena's company. "Ms. Vasquez, we've experienced some temporary cash flow challenges due to market volatility," Richard said weakly, "but we expect to resolve those issues within the next few weeks. Mr. Blackstone, you've had 3 months to resolve your cash flow challenges, and during that time you've continued to treat my building staff with abuse and disrespect," Elena replied. "Your behavior suggests that you believe your perceived social status exempts you from basic obligations to pay rent and treat people decently." Elena instructed her legal department to proceed with immediate lease termination and eviction proceedings, giving Blackstone Capital Management 30 days to vacate the premises and settle their outstanding rent obligations. "Ms. Vasquez, surely we can work out some kind of arrangement," Richard pleaded, his voice showing desperation as he realized that his arrogance and entitlement were about to cost him everything he had built. "Mr. Blackstone, the time for arrangements was 3 months ago, when you first fell behind on rent, or 3 weeks ago, when you began verbally abusing someone you assumed was powerless to respond," Elena replied with finality. "Your treatment of people reveals character, and your character has proven to be incompatible with the standards I maintain in my buildings." The coffee lady, who Richard had dismissed as irrelevant help, had revealed herself as the person with complete authority over his business future, and the lessons about respect and human dignity were about to become the most expensive education of his career. Chapter 5. The Consequences. Within 24 hours of Elena Vasquez's revelation of her true identity, the consequences of Richard Blackstone's behavior began cascading through his business and personal life in ways that would fundamentally transform his understanding of power, respect, and the importance of treating all people with dignity. The immediate impact was the formal notice of lease termination that arrived at Blackstone Capital Management on Tuesday morning, giving Richard 30 days to vacate the prestigious office space that had been central to his firm's image and client attraction strategy. "Richard, we need to discuss this eviction notice immediately," said Michael Torres, Blackstone Capital's senior partner, as he burst into Richard's office with obvious panic. "Losing this address will destroy our ability to attract high-net-worth clients who expect us to operate from prestigious locations." Richard had spent Monday evening trying to develop strategies for salvaging the situation, but Elena's decision appeared to be final and non-negotiable. Her legal department had made clear that the lease termination was based not only on unpaid rent, but also on documented violations of tenant conduct standards that provided grounds for immediate eviction. "Michael, I'm exploring all possible options for reversing this decision," Richard said, though his voice carried none of its usual confidence. "There may be legal challenges we can pursue, or perhaps we can negotiate a settlement that allows us to remain in the building." But Richard's legal research had already revealed that Eleanor's grounds for eviction were comprehensive and well documented. Her 3 weeks of covert observation had provided detailed evidence of conduct violations that would be difficult to challenge in court, particularly when combined with the firm's failure to pay rent for 3 months. The second consequence was the rapid spread of information about Richard's situation throughout Chicago's financial community. Elena's reputation as a property owner who maintained high standards meant that her decision to evict a tenant quickly became known among other landlords and business leaders. "Richard, I'm hearing rumors that Elena Vasquez terminated your lease due to conduct issues," said Patricia Williams, a prominent commercial real estate broker, during a call that Richard had hoped would help him find alternative office space. "Unfortunately, Ms. Vasquez's decision to evict your firm is making it difficult to find comparable space in premium buildings. Other property owners are reluctant to lease to tenants who have been terminated by Elena Vasquez for conduct violations." Richard was discovering that Elena's reputation for maintaining professional standards in her buildings made her eviction decisions carry weight throughout Chicago's commercial real estate market. Property owners who respected Elena's judgment were unwilling to accept tenants that she had deemed unsuitable. The third consequence was the impact on Blackstone Capital's client relationships, as news of the eviction began affecting the firm's reputation and perceived stability. "Richard, I'm calling to discuss the status of our portfolio management." "Agreement," said Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a wealthy client who had invested several $1 million with Blackstone Capital. "I'm concerned about reports that your firm is facing operational difficulties that could affect your ability to manage our investments." Similar calls were coming from other clients who were questioning whether Blackstone Capital's eviction indicated broader business problems that could threaten their investment security. "Dr. Martinez, I assure you that our eviction from Hartford Financial Plaza doesn't affect our ability to manage your portfolio," Richard said, though he knew that client confidence was being undermined by perceptions of instability and poor management. But the most devastating consequence was Richard's growing understanding of how completely he had misunderstood the situation with Eleanor and the broader implications of his treatment of people he had perceived as powerless. Jennifer Walsh, his executive assistant, had submitted her resignation, with a letter that detailed the hostile work environment Richard had created and her decision to seek employment where she would be treated with professional respect. "Mr. Blackstone, I can no longer work in an environment where verbal abuse and public humiliation are considered acceptable management techniques," Jennifer's resignation letter stated. "Your treatment of building staff and junior employees demonstrates a lack of character that I can no longer tolerate or enable." Jennifer's resignation was followed by similar departures from 3 other Blackstone Capital employees who had witnessed Richard's behavior toward Elena and decided that they didn't want to work for someone who treated people with such contempt. The staff departures were creating operational problems that compounded the challenges of finding new office space and retaining clients who were questioning the firm's stability and leadership. Richard was also facing personal consequences as news of his eviction, and the circumstances surrounding it became known within Chicago's social circles. Country club memberships and social invitations that had been based on his perceived wealth and success were being withdrawn as people learned about his character and business failures. "Richard, I'm calling to inform you that the Lakeshore Country Club Board has voted to suspend your membership pending resolution of the conduct issues that led to your commercial eviction," said David Park, the club's membership. "Chairman, the club maintains standards for member behavior that extend beyond our facilities to general conduct in business and social situations. But perhaps the most humbling consequence was Richard's forced recognition of how completely he had misjudged Elena Vasquez and the assumptions he had made about people based on their appearance and job roles. Elena's revelation that she owned Hartford Financial Plaza and managed a real estate empire worth nearly $500 million had shattered Richard's worldview about power, success, and social status. Elena Vasquez has been one of Chicago's most successful real estate developers for over 20 years, Richard learned during his research into her background. She's known for maintaining the highest professional standards in her buildings, while also being one of the most generous philanthropists in the city. Richard discovered that Eleanor's practice of working in service positions within her own buildings was part of a management philosophy that emphasized direct observation and genuine understanding of tenant behavior, rather than relying on traditional property management reports. Ms. Vasquez's approach to property management has made her buildings among the most sought-after business addresses in Chicago, explained Dr. Patricia Chen, a business school professor who had studied Elena's innovative management techniques. Her insistence on high standards for tenant behavior has created work environments that attract the most successful and ethical business leaders, while excluding problematic tenants who create hostile or unprofessional conditions. Richard was beginning to understand that his eviction wasn't the result of arbitrary authority or personal vendetta, but rather the consequence of systematic evaluation by someone whose success was built on exactly the kind of character and business ethics that he had failed to demonstrate. The coffee lady, who he had dismissed as irrelevant help, had revealed herself as someone whose business accomplishments and professional reputation far exceeded his own, and whose judgment about character and suitability would determine his future ability to operate from prestigious business locations in Chicago. Richard Blackstone was learning that true power wasn't based on inherited wealth or social status, but on character, competence, and the respect earned through treating all people with dignity, regardless of their perceived position or importance. Chapter 6. The Transformation. 6 months after Elena Vasquez revealed her true identity and evicted Blackstone Capital Management from Hartford Financial Plaza, Richard Blackstone found himself operating from a modest office space in a less prestigious building while struggling to rebuild both his business and his reputation in Chicago's financial community. The eviction had triggered a series of consequences that forced Richard to confront fundamental flaws in his character and approach to business that he had never previously examined. For the first time in his privileged life, Richard was experiencing the reality that actions have consequences and that treatment of others ultimately determines how one is treated in return. Blackstone Capital's client base had shrunk by 60% as investors lost confidence in a firm that appeared to be unstable and poorly managed. The loss of their prestigious address had made it difficult to attract new wealthy clients who expected their investment. Managers to operate from addresses that reflected success and reliability. "Richard, I have to be honest with you about the challenges we're facing," said Michael Torres during one of their weekly partner meetings in their new, much smaller office. "Our reputation in the financial community has been severely damaged, and it's affecting every aspect of our business operations." Michael's assessment was accurate, but painful. Richard was learning that reputation and credibility, once lost, were extremely difficult to rebuild, particularly when the damage resulted from character flaws rather than simple business mistakes. But the most significant transformation was occurring in Richard's understanding of how his treatment of people had affected not only those individuals, but also his own success and relationships. Jennifer Walsh's departure had been followed by detailed conversations with other former employees who described years of verbal abuse, public humiliation, and hostile work, conditions that Richard had created through his management style. "Mr. Blackstone, I worked for your firm for 4 years, and during that time I was constantly afraid of making minor mistakes that would result in public criticism," explained Sarah Martinez, a former analyst who had left Blackstone Capital shortly after the eviction. "Your treatment of building staff and junior employees created an environment where everyone was walking on eggshells, afraid that any interaction with you could result in verbal assault or professional retaliation." These conversations forced Richard to recognize that his behavior had been systematically damaging to people who depended on their employment and couldn't defend themselves against his abuse of authority. The transformation deepened when Richard began researching Elena Vasquez's background and business philosophy, trying to understand how someone could build such a successful empire while maintaining the values that had led to his eviction. Elena Vasquez has built her real estate success on a foundation of treating all people with respect and creating work environments where employees feel valued and protected, Richard learned from business articles about Elena's management approach. Her buildings are known throughout Chicago for maintaining the highest professional standards while also fostering collaborative and supportive workplace cultures. Richard discovered that Elena's practice of working in service positions within her own buildings was part of a comprehensive management philosophy that emphasized direct observation, authentic understanding of employee experiences, and systematic evaluation of tenant character. Ms. Vasquez believes that someone's treatment of service workers is the most accurate indicator of their true character and likely behavior in business relationships, explained Dr. James Morrison, a business ethics professor who had studied Elena's innovative management techniques. Her eviction decisions are based on careful observation of tenant behavior rather than arbitrary judgments, and her standards have made her properties among the most desirable business locations in the city. Richard was beginning to understand that Elena's success was built on exactly the kind of character, integrity, and respect for others that he had failed to demonstrate throughout his career. The transformation accelerated when Richard decided to make direct contact with Elena to apologize for his behavior and attempt to understand the lessons she had tried to teach him through her covert evaluation. "Ms. Vasquez, I'm calling to request a meeting where I can apologize for my behavior and try to understand how I can learn from the experience of working with you," Richard said during a phone call that required enormous humility from someone who had never previously acknowledged making mistakes. Elena agreed to meet with Richard, though she made clear that the meeting was educational rather than an attempt to reverse his eviction or restore his lease. "Mr. Blackstone, I'm willing to discuss what happened and what you might learn from the experience," Eleanor said during their meeting in her actual office, which reflected the success and sophistication that Richard had failed to recognize when she was wearing a service uniform. "But I want you to understand that this conversation is about your personal development, not about changing the consequences of your behavior toward my staff and other tenants." During their 2-hour conversation, Elena outlined the specific observations that had led to her decision to evict Blackstone Capital, emphasizing how Richard's treatment of people revealed character flaws that made him unsuitable as a tenant in buildings where she maintained high standards for professional behavior. "Your abuse of people you perceived as powerless demonstrated that you lacked the basic human decency that I require from tenants," Elena explained directly. "But more importantly, your willingness to humiliate employees in front of clients showed that you prioritized your own ego over the professional environment and employee welfare that successful businesses require." Elena's feedback was difficult for Richard to hear, but it provided insights into how his behavior appeared to others and why it had been so damaging to his business relationships and professional reputation. "Mrs. Vasquez, I'm beginning to understand that my treatment of people was not only morally wrong but also destructively counterproductive to my own success," Richard admitted. During their conversation, "I never realized that my behavior towards service workers and junior employees was being observed and evaluated by people whose opinions could affect my business future." Elena's response helped Richard understand that respect for others wasn't just a moral obligation, but also a practical necessity for anyone who wanted to build sustainable success in business and relationships. "Mr. Blackstone, successful people understand that everyone they encounter has dignity and deserves respectful treatment," Eleanor explained. "When you treat people poorly because you think they're powerless, you reveal character flaws that ultimately damage your own reputation and relationships." The meeting with Elena marked the beginning of a fundamental transformation in Richard's approach to business and interpersonal relationships that would continue for years as he worked to rebuild both his firm and his character. Richard Blackstone was learning that true success required not only business competence, but also human decency, and that the most valuable lessons often came from people who had been in positions to observe and evaluate character, when it was revealed through unguarded interactions with those perceived as less important. Chapter 7. The Rebuilding. 1 year after his humbling encounter with Elena Vasquez, Richard Blackstone had undergone a transformation. That surprised not only his former employees and business associates, but himself. The man who had once treated service workers with contempt was now building a new version of Blackstone Capital Management based on principles of respect, integrity, and recognition that every person deserved dignity, regardless of their job title or social status. The rebuilding process had been more difficult than any business challenge Richard had previously faced, requiring him to acknowledge fundamental character flaws while developing new approaches to leadership and interpersonal relationships that contradicted everything he had been taught about authority and success. "Richard, I have to say that the changes in your management style and business approach have been remarkable," said Dr. Patricia Williams, a business consultant who had been working with Richard to develop more effective and ethical leadership practices. "Your willingness to examine and modify behavior patterns that had been destructive for years demonstrates a level of self-awareness and commitment to improvement that's rare among executives who have experienced the kind of success you had before your eviction." Richard's transformation had begun with systematic efforts to understand and address the damage his previous behavior had caused to employees, business relationships, and his own reputation within Chicago's financial community. His first step had been reaching out to former employees like Jennifer Walsh and Sarah Martinez to apologize for his treatment and learn about the impact his behavior had on their professional experiences and personal well-being. "Mr. Blackstone, I appreciate your apology, though I have to admit, I never expected you to acknowledge how your behavior affected the people who worked for you," Jennifer had said, during a conversation that was both healing for her and educational for Richard. "Your verbal abuse and public humiliation created an environment where I dreaded coming to work and constantly worried about making minor mistakes that would result in professional retaliation. These conversations forced Richard to confront the human costs of his previous management style, while also providing insights into how he could create healthier and more productive work environments in his rebuilt firm. Richard had also initiated a systematic review of his business practices, working with ethics consultants to identify and eliminate questionable activities that had exposed his previous firm to legal and regulatory risks while damaging his professional reputation. We've implemented comprehensive compliance procedures and ethical guidelines that exceed industry standards, explained Michael Torres, who had remained with Richard throughout the rebuilding process and had become his partner in creating a more responsible approach to financial management. Richard's commitment to operating with complete transparency and integrity has actually become a competitive advantage. In attracting clients who want to work with investment managers they can trust completely. The new Blackstone Capital Management had attracted a different type of clientele than Richard's previous firm, focusing on investors who valued ethical business practices and long-term relationship building rather than just maximum returns achieved through aggressive or questionable strategies. Richard's transformation has been genuine and comprehensive, reported Dr. Elena Martinez, a client who had moved her portfolio to the rebuilt firm after observing Richard's changed approach to business and employee relations. His new focus on transparency, employee respect, and ethical business practices has created exactly the kind of investment management relationship that I was seeking. But perhaps the most significant aspect of Richard's transformation was his development of genuine appreciation for the value and dignity of all types of work, particularly service positions that he had previously dismissed as unimportant. Richard had begun volunteering at community centers and non-profit organizations, working in service roles that gave him direct experience with the challenges and demands of employment that he had never understood despite benefiting from such services throughout his privileged life. Working in food service and building maintenance has taught me things about work, dignity, and human relationships that I never learned during my business education or corporate career, Richard explained during an interview with a business journal about executive leadership and character development. I now understand that every job requires skill, dedication, and deserves respect, and that someone's treatment of service workers reveals more about their character than their treatment of wealthy clients or business peers. Richard's volunteer work had also connected him with Elena Vasquez's charitable foundations, which provided educational and professional development opportunities for immigrants and working-class individuals whose talents were often overlooked by traditional business institutions. Richard's genuine commitment to supporting service workers and recognizing the value of all types of employment has been one of the most significant transformations I've witnessed in 30 years of observing business leaders, Eleanor said during a foundation board meeting where Richard had been invited to discuss his change in perspective. His evolution from someone who treated service workers with contempt to someone who actively supports their professional development demonstrates that people can change when they're motivated by genuine recognition of their mistakes. Eleanor's acknowledgement of Richard's transformation was particularly meaningful because it came from someone whose judgment about character had proven to be both accurate and consequential for Richard's business future. The relationship between Richard and Eleanor had evolved from adversarial to respectfully collaborative, with Elena serving as an unofficial mentor who helped Richard understand the business value of ethical behavior and genuine respect for all people. Elena taught me that authentic success requires not only business competence, but also human decency, Richard reflected during a presentation about his transformation to a group of business school students. Her decision to evict me from Hartford Financial Plaza was the most valuable lesson of my career, because it forced me to examine character flaws that were ultimately destructive to my own success, as well as harmful to other people. Richard's rebuilt firm was now operating from a mid-sized office building that reflected his more modest and realistic understanding of his place in Chicago's business community, but the quality of his client relationships and employee satisfaction had improved dramatically compared to his previous success. I've learned that true success isn't measured by the prestige of your office address or the size of your bank account, Richard explained during a speech about business ethics and leadership development. True success is measured by the positive impact you have on other people's lives and the respect you earn through treating everyone with dignity and fairness. Richard Blackstone had discovered that rebuilding his character was more challenging than rebuilding his business, but also more valuable than any financial achievement he had previously accomplished. The man who had once dismissed a coffee service employee was now someone who understood that every person deserved respect, and that the most important business lessons often came from people whose wisdom was hidden behind job titles that didn't reflect their true worth and knowledge. Chapter 8. The Legacy. 5 years after Elena Vasquez's revelation transformed Richard Blackstone's understanding of power, respect, and human dignity, their story had become a case study used in business schools throughout the United States to teach future executives about ethical leadership, authentic success, and the importance of treating all people with respect, regardless of their apparent position or status. Richard, now operating a successful but deliberately smaller investment firm focused on ethical financial management and employee development, had become one of Chicago's most respected advocates for workplace dignity and service worker rights. His transformation from arrogant and abusive executive to genuine leader had attracted attention from business researchers who wanted to understand how dramatic character change was possible in corporate environments. Richard Blackstone's evolution represents one of the most comprehensive leadership transformations I've documented in 25 years of studying executive behavior, explained Dr. James Morrison, a business school professor who had written extensively about Richard's case. His willingness to acknowledge destructive behavior patterns and implement fundamental changes in his approach to leadership and interpersonal relationships demonstrates that authentic character development is possible even for executives who have achieved success through problematic methods. Richard's rebuilt firm, now called Ethical Capital Partners, had become a model for how investment management companies could maintain high profitability while prioritizing employee welfare, client transparency, and socially responsible business practices. Richard's approach to business has proven that ethical behavior and financial success are not only compatible but mutually reinforcing, reported Dr. Patricia Chen, who had studied the performance of ethical capital partners compared to traditional investment firms. His focus on long-term client relationships, employee development, and community contribution has generated returns that exceed industry averages while creating sustainable business practices that benefit all stakeholders. But Richard's most significant achievement was his collaboration with Elena Vasquez to establish the Dignity at Work Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to promoting respectful treatment of service workers and providing professional development opportunities for people whose talents were often overlooked due to their current employment circumstances. The foundation represents our shared commitment to ensuring that every person is treated with dignity and respect in their workplace regardless of their job title or social status, Elena explained, during the Foundation's 5th anniversary celebration. Richard's transformation from someone who abused service workers to someone who actively advocates for their rights demonstrates that people can change when they recognize the human cost of their behavior. The Dignity at Work Foundation's programs had provided professional development, educational support, and career advancement opportunities for over 3,000 service workers throughout Chicago, helping them transition to positions that better utilize their skills and talents, while also educating employers about the value of treating all employees with respect. Maria Santos, a former hotel housekeeper who had earned her business degree with foundation support and now managed operations for a major hospitality company, represented the kind of success stories that motivated the Foundation's continued work. The Foundation didn't just provide financial support for my education, Maria explained during a program graduation ceremony. It provided recognition that my experience in service work had given me valuable skills and knowledge that could contribute to business success when properly developed and supported. Similar transformation stories had emerged from foundation programs that identified and developed hidden talents among building maintenance workers, food service employees, and other service professionals whose abilities were often invisible to traditional hiring and promotion systems. Elena's ongoing involvement in the foundation reflected her continued commitment to using her business success to create opportunities for people whose potential might otherwise remain unrealized due to economic circumstances or social barriers. My approach to business has always been based on recognizing that every person has value and potential that deserves respect and development, Eleanor said during a Harvard Business School case study interview about her innovative management techniques. Richard's story proves that even people who initially treat others poorly can learn to appreciate human dignity and contribute positively to creating better work environments and business practices. Elena's property management empire had continued to grow, now including commercial real estate throughout the Midwest, but her practice of working in service positions within her own buildings remained central to her evaluation of tenants and her understanding of how business leaders actually behaved when they thought no one important was watching. Elena's management approach has become a model for property owners who want to maintain high standards for tenant behavior while creating positive work environments, reported Dr. Michael Torres, who had studied Elena's innovative techniques for multiple business publications. Her insistence that tenant character matters as much as financial capability has resulted in buildings that attract the most ethical and successful business leaders while excluding problematic tenants who create hostile work environments. Richard's speaking engagements at business schools and professional conferences had become opportunities to share lessons about the relationship between character, leadership, and sustainable business success that could only come from someone who had experienced both the consequences of poor character and the benefits of authentic transformation. The most important lesson from my experience with Elena Vasquez is that every person you encounter has dignity and deserves respectful treatment, Richard explained during a keynote address to the National Association of Business Leaders. When you treat people poorly because you think they're powerless or unimportant, you reveal character flaws that will ultimately damage your own success and relationships. But more importantly, Richard continued, you miss opportunities to learn from people whose knowledge and experience could enhance your understanding and improve your business decisions. Richard's relationship with Elena had evolved into a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared commitment to promoting dignity and ethical behavior in business environments. Elena taught me that true power comes from using your success to improve other people's lives, rather than just accumulating wealth or status, Richard reflected during their foundation board meetings. Her decision to evict me from Hartford Financial Plaza was actually a gift because it forced me to examine my character and develop into someone I can respect, rather than just someone who is financially successful. Standing together at the Foundation's annual awards ceremony, Elena and Richard represented a remarkable partnership between someone who had always understood the importance of human dignity and someone who had learned those lessons through painful but transformative experience. Elena's story had proven that true authority came from character and competence rather than titles or appearances, and that the most effective leaders were those who treated all people with respect while maintaining high standards for ethical behavior. Richard's story had demonstrated that authentic transformation was possible even for people whose behavior had been destructive, and that the most valuable business lessons often came from recognizing and correcting character flaws rather than just acquiring technical skills or financial knowledge. Together, they had created a legacy that extended far beyond their individual businesses to influence how organizations throughout Chicago and beyond understood the relationship between character, leadership, and sustainable success. The coffee lady who had revealed herself as a building owner and the executive who had learned to value human dignity had proven that respect should never depend on someone's apparent position, and that the most important business relationships were those built on mutual recognition of each person's inherent worth and potential contribution. What an incredible journey we've witnessed together. From that shocking moment when Richard discovered that the coffee lady he had been treating with contempt was actually Eleanor, the owner of the entire building, to watching him transform from an arrogant executive into a genuine advocate for workplace dignity and service worker rights. This story proves that true power and authority often come disguised in humble appearances, and that the person you're mistreating might actually be the one person who controls your future. Eleanor's story shows us that authentic leadership means treating all people with respect, regardless of their job titles, and that the most effective way to evaluate someone's character is to observe how they treat people they perceive as powerless. Richard's transformation demonstrates that even the most arrogant individuals can change when they're forced to confront the consequences of their behavior and genuinely commit to becoming better people. If this story inspired you as much as it inspired me, please show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel for more incredible stories of hidden identity and unexpected authority. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that respect should be universal, not dependent on someone's apparent status or position. And remember, you never know who you're really talking to. The person serving your coffee, cleaning your office, or working in any service position might possess more power, wisdom, and authority than you ever imagined. The question is, are you treating everyone with the respect they deserve, or are you making assumptions that could come back to change your life in ways you never expected?